Imagine driving on a road that felt like glass, or, walking into a brand new community center that just shimmered with possibility.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't just wishful thoughts. They're, tangible improvements that really shape our daily lives.
They absolutely are.
But here's the crucial question. How do our local governments actually make them happen? And maybe more importantly, what are the hidden costs behind those decisions?
That really is a central challenge for municipalities, isn't it? Every road repair, every park upgrade, or any new public facility requires pretty significant funding.
Right.
And while municipal bonds are, a very common tool for these capital improvements and renovations, their long-term implications are often, misunderstood.
And this topic is incredibly timely for so many communities. Just recently, actually, on June 17, 2025, the St. Johns County Board of County Commissioners voted to fund some capital projects through municipal bonds.
Yes, I saw that.
And that decision, like similar ones in counties all across the nation, it really brings the long-term impact of these financial choices into, sharp focus for taxpayers.
Exactly. So our mission today is really to cut through some of that complexity. We want to give you a comprehensive roadmap for how local governments can fund and manage capital projects, with fiscal prudence and operational excellence.
Okay.
We'll explore diverse strategies beyond just traditional debt financing and show how institutionalizing efficiency can lead to far better, more sustainable outcomes.
So, if you've ever wondered how your tax dollars transform into actual concrete improvements, or maybe why they sometimes don't seem to go as far as they should, this deep dive is definitely for you. We've pulled insights from expert municipal finance documents and also a focused report specifically on capital projects and fiscal management in St. Johns County itself. So let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with just the sheer scale of the challenge. Public infrastructure is, undeniably essential, but it's also inherently expensive.
Very expensive.
St. Johns County alone has identified approximately, $538.5 million in capital improvement plan, or CIP projects, just for the 5-year period, from fiscal year 2024 to 2028.
That's a huge number.
It is. And to fund figures like that, one of the most common tools, often maybe the first one many governments turn to, is municipal bonds.
Right. And the crucial insight about municipal bonds, I think, is that while they seem like easy money, they are, at their core, debt obligations.
Okay, debt.
They're basically how states, cities, counties, other public entities borrow money from investors to finance those really large-scale infrastructure and renovation projects.
So it's essentially a government-issued IOU.
Pretty much, yes.
But are all these IOUs the same? Or are there different kinds?
Oh, not at all. We generally talk about two primary types. First, there are general obligation bonds, or GO bonds.
GO bonds, okay.
These are considered very secure because they're backed by the full faith and credit of the issuer, which usually means the government's entire taxing authority.
So they can raise taxes to pay them back if needed?
Exactly. St. Johns County, for instance, issues these. If push comes to shove, the government has that power. Then you have revenue bonds.
Revenue bonds.
These are secured solely by a specific income stream generated by the project itself. So think user fees from water and sewer services, maybe tolls from a bridge.
Got it. Like the project pays for itself.
In theory, yes. St. Johns County issues water and sewer revenue bonds, for example. And there's also a category called private activity bonds.
Private activity, how does that work?
Well, in that case, a private entity is actually responsible for the repayment, even if the project serves some kind of public purpose. The St. Johns County Industrial Development Authority, the IDA, issues Industrial Development Revenue Bonds, or IDRBs.
Okay.
And those are paid back solely from revenues generated by the company or the project that's benefiting from the funds.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I often hear that a big draw from municipal bonds is their tax exemption. That sounds like a powerful incentive, right, for both the investor and the government.
It's true. It seems convenient. Absolutely. The interest earned on municipal bonds is often federally tax exempt, and sometimes it's exempt from state and local income taxes, too.
Right.
And this tax benefit means investors are willing to accept lower interest rates simply because their earnings are shielded from taxes.
Which means cheaper borrowing for the government.
Which in turn allows governments to borrow at a lower cost. The St. Johns County IDA actually notes how this can lead to significant savings over the life of a bond obligation. However...
there's the however.
Yes. This is where the seeming simplicity kind of gives way to a deeper, much more complicated reality.
So that convenience sounds great. But what's the catch? Why might bonds seem like the easy button, but actually come with significant long-term costs to taxpayers that maybe often get overlooked?
Well, the catch is that this perceived convenience often masks some pretty substantial long-term disadvantages. Firstly, at low cost you mentioned. It's incredibly vulnerable to external factors,
Like what?
particularly shifts in federal tax policy. If that federal tax exemption were ever repealed, for instance, interest rates on municipal bonds would just skyrocket.
Wow.
And that directly increases borrowing costs for state and local governments. I mean, consider this. The city of Alexandria, Virginia, estimated that a mere 2% interest rate increase would add $24.8 million in debt service per average bond issuance over its lifetime.
24 million extra, just from a 2% jump.
Per issuance, that's a huge, unpredictable risk governments take on.
So it's not just about what the rates are today, but this enormous exposure to future policy changes. It's like taking out a mortgage where the interest rate could suddenly jump based on a decision made hundreds of miles away.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. And secondly, there's the issue of the long-term burden and what we call intergenerational equity.
Intergenerational equity, meaning passing the cost to future residents.
Exactly. While borrowing through bonds does spread the initial expense over time, which sounds appealing upfront, it inherently means future generations will bear the cost. They'll pay through higher taxes or user fees to service that debt.
Right.
It's definitely not free money, it's just deferred payment. And this raises a real ethical consideration for elected officials, Are they burdening future taxpayers for today's projects?
And if these tax exemptions are designed to help local governments, is that federal subsidy actually efficient? It sounds like a pretty complex financial tool.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that economists often view it as a rather inefficient subsidy.
Inefficient. How so?
Well, the cost to the federal government in foregone tax revenues estimated at $40 billion annually and a staggering $469 billion projected over fiscal years 2025 to 2034, that cost is actually larger than the benefit state and local governments receive in lower borrowing costs.
Wait, the government loses more money than the municipalities save.
That's the economic argument, yes. And it also contributes significantly to the overall public debt. State and local governments collectively had $4.01 trillion in outstanding debt at the end of 2022.
Trillion.
With a T. And roughly 60% of that was issued by local governments. High borrowing costs can consume a significant portion of local budgets, really straining resources that could otherwise go to essential services.
Yeah.
St. Johns County, for instance, already has outstanding water and sewer revenue bonds and special obligation refunding revenue bonds, highlighting the scale of this existing burden even before new votes.
So the perceived convenience of bonding, it really masks these pretty significant long-term disadvantages. Makes it clear why experts suggest it should really be considered a last resort.
It really should be.
It's like a financial treadmill. You keep moving, but the debt just keeps accumulating behind you.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so if bonds should truly be viewed as a last resort, what are the smart alternatives available to municipalities, including places like St. Johns County, to fund these crucial projects without piling on more debt?
Thankfully, there are several highly effective strategies that move beyond traditional debt financing. Let's maybe group them into a few key approaches.
Okay.
First, there's direct revenue funding. This includes things like general fund allocations.
So using money they already have coming.
Exactly. Using a portion of current tax revenues like property or sales taxes to directly fund projects. The benefit here is crystal clear. It avoids long-term debt and it promotes very prudent financial management. Think of it as a pay-as-you-go system.
That makes perfect sense. No debt, no interest payments. What about tapping into outside resources? Are there ways to get money from elsewhere?
Absolutely. That leads us to seeking external funds. Federal and state grants are a huge one. These are non-repayable funds designated for specific projects like road repairs or environmental initiatives.
Non-repayable, so free money.
Essentially, yes, if you can secure them. They significantly relieve the financial burden on municipalities and can also strengthen partnerships with higher levels of government.
Where do they find these?
Well, there are places like the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Capital Projects Fund, which focuses on broadband and community facilities, or just general portals like grants.gov. And then state-specific programs like from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection or the Department of Transportation.
Okay, so grants are definitely worth pursuing. Now, what about managing the financial impact of growth itself? because new development always puts a strain on existing infrastructure, right?
It certainly does, and that's where impact fees come in.
Impact fees, I've heard of those.
They're basically one-time charges on new development. They're designed specifically to offset the infrastructure strain that new growth creates.
So the new houses help pay for the new roads they need.
Precisely. They ensure that growth directly contributes to enhancing community infrastructure. Now, it's crucial for these fees to have a clear legal basis, a direct link to the capital improvement plan we mentioned, and for the funds to be segregated, kept separate, so they're used solely for their intended purpose.
Right, so the money raised for roads actually goes to roads.
Exactly. It ensures that new development helps pay for the new roads, schools, parks that it necessitates.
So growth pays for itself, at least to some extent. What about bringing in the private sector? Can they help with capital and expertise?
Yes, and that's where public-private partnerships, or P3s, become incredibly valuable.
P3s.
These are collaborations between municipalities and private entities, designed to leverage private capital and expertise. They can really alleviate the municipal financial load and also infuse innovation into project execution.
How do those work? Are there different types?
Oh yes, there are various forms, like design, build, operate, maintain models where the private partner handles almost everything. St. Johns County, for example, is actively pursuing a P3 for the World Golf Hall of Fame property right now.
Interesting.
It's a powerful way to bring in outside resources and ideas without relying solely on taxpayer dollars or, crucially, public debt.
That sounds like a smart way to share both the cost and maybe the risk, too.
It can be, yes.
And sometimes you need funds for very specific geographic areas, right? Not county-wide.
That's a good point. And that's where dedicated tax revenues can come into play. This involves setting aside specific tax collections, maybe through things like tax increment financing or TIF or district improvement financing, DIF.
God, how's that work again?
Well, TIF, for instance, captures the future tax gains from new development within a specifically designated area to fund current improvements right there in that area.
Ah, okay. So the future growth pays for today's upgrades.
Exactly. We've seen this used effectively in places like Orlando, Florida, to improve infrastructure in redevelopment zones. It provides very tailored financial support for specific areas by leveraging the growth that's expected to happen there.
And for services where there's a clear direct beneficiary, like maybe water service, I assume there's a direct payment model.
Absolutely. User fees in utility districts fall squarely into this category. These are direct charges for specific public services, like water or wastewater. Or they can be through special purpose governmental entities like municipal utility districts or MUDs.
Right, like paying your water bill.
Precisely. They create a sustainable revenue stream and help ensure that those who benefit directly from a service contribute to its funding. This makes the service more self-sustaining without burdening the general taxpayer for something they might not use as much.
Okay. And finally, what about simply saving up for big projects? You know, like a responsible household saves for a down payment on a house.
Yes, that's the vital role of reserves. These are basically accumulated funds that are set aside for specific purposes, like capital improvements or unexpected contingencies.
Just a rainy day fund, but for big projects.
Kind of, yeah. They provide immediate funding without needing to take on debt, and they are absolutely crucial for prudent long-term financial management. St. Johns County, in fact, has a stated goal of achieving a healthier reserve fund.
That sounds like a good goal.
It is. Establishing clear policies for how reserves can be used, having consistent funding mechanisms like making annual contributions or setting aside unexpected one-time revenues, and integrating them tightly into a capital asset management program is just vital for long-term financial health.
Wow. Okay, so if you think about how these diverse approaches really offer a pathway for your local government to fund essential services without perpetually adding to its debt. It's really not about finding one single silver bullet, is it? It's about building a robust toolkit of options.
Exactly, a diverse toolkit.
And what's fascinating is seeing how these strategies are actually being put into practice by municipalities across the country, including right here in Florida.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, many entities are already demonstrating successful non-bond funding. Cabarrus County, North Carolina, is a really strong example of a pay-as-you-go or PA-go model.
Here you go.
They prioritize funding capital projects directly from current revenues, specifically to minimize debt. They use excess money from their general fund and also a dedicated community investment fund. In fiscal year 2024 alone, they funded 12 projects totaling $22.4 million this way.
$22 million without borrowing.
Correct. It's a very disciplined approach that directly reduces their reliance on borrowing.
So they're essentially building up a financial cushion and then drawing directly from it for big projects. That avoids interest payments entirely.
Exactly right. And Mercer Island, Washington, also provides a great illustration of diversifying funding sources for their capital improvement program.
How they do it?
They rely heavily on things like the real estate excise tax, fuel taxes, utility rates, and, of course, their general fund. This diversified approach helps them avoid bond debt and increase their fiscal independence. It really demonstrates how multiple non-debt sources can create a more resilient funding model.
And we even have a collaborative example here in Florida that St. Johns County is actually part of, right? Something bigger than just a single county working alone.
Absolutely. That's the Florida Local Government Finance Commission. It was formed way back in 1991 by an interlocal agreement between various Florida counties, including St. John's.
An interlocal agreement. So they teamed up.
Yes, this legal entity provides a low-cost financing alternative for capital improvement projects specifically for its members. They've loaned over $2.8 billion to more than 50 Florida local governments and districts since they started.
$2.8 billion, that's significant.
It is. It's a prime example of how multi-county cooperation can create a financing mechanism that helps support renovations without directly adding to a specific county's general obligation bond debt load.
So it's not just about a single county's efforts, but how they can actually work together to find smarter funding solutions.
That's really interesting. What about leveraging or sharing existing facilities to save money? Does that happen?
Yes, the interlocal agreement between Travis County and the city of Austin, Texas, for booking and related services is quite illuminating on this.
How so?
It shows how a city can use designated space within a county building and then perform renovations to its allocated space, but with county approval and at its own expense.
So sharing space instead of building new.
Exactly. This arrangement demonstrates how existing facilities and their associated renovation costs can be shared or allocated through carefully defined agreements. It potentially minimizes the need for brand new, likely debt-financed construction. It's really about smart resource utilization.
That's a fascinating array of alternatives. It really shows that a disciplined approach to funding capital improvements is not just theoretical. It's actually happening right now in communities across the country.
It is.
It's about being resourceful, isn't it? Absolutely, being creative and resourceful.
Okay, so beyond just how the money is raised, it's also critically about how these projects are managed from start to finish.
Right.
This is where strategic project management comes in, ensuring that the funds, no matter where they came from, are used as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Yes. And what's truly transformative here, I think, is the power of using phased approaches and setting clear milestones.
Phased approaches, breaking it down.
Exactly. Large public infrastructure projects like that $538.5 million St. Johns County CIP we mentioned are inherently complex and risky if you try to tackle them as one single monolithic endeavor.
Okay.
Breaking them down into smaller, incremental pieces allows for individual development, testing, and it makes the risks much easier to understand and manage.
Bite-sized pieces.
Sort of, yes. This means issues are identified and mitigated much earlier in the process, which leads to higher quality outcomes and significantly reduced financial exposure for the county.
So instead of one massive years-long project with just a single distant finish line, you're creating multiple mini-projects with smaller, more frequent checkpoints along the way. That sounds much less daunting and definitely more controllable.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
This increases efficiency, predictability, and transparency. It transforms problem solving from, reactive crisis management into proactive mitigation.
Which is crucial with big projects.
Especially vital when you consider changing factors like weather, supply disruptions, or even just evolving community needs over time. This enhanced efficiency means resources are allocated more precisely, cash flow is managed with greater foresight, and it can significantly reduce the need for those large upfront capital infusions that often necessitate debt.
Right.
Imagine, for example, integrating needed security enhancements into normal maintenance schedules, spreading those costs over time, and avoiding additional immediate debt for a big security overhaul.
And these milestones you mentioned, they act like critical checkpoints, ensuring things are on track before more money is committed, like a series of green lights you have to pass.
That's a good way to think of it. You can think of them as toll gates. They provide regular checkpoints to test progress, identify any issues, and adjust plans as needed.
So it's more flexible.
Very much so. This supports adaptive project management, allowing for feedback to be incorporated at each stage, which helps prevent sudden, costly changes much later in the project. And we see real-world applications showing this efficacy.
Like where?
Well, the Gainesville City Commission adopted a phased approach for a multi-purpose center, which allowed them to build new facilities while the old ones remained operational, less disruption.
Smart.
Western Carolina University used a phased approach for stadium upgrades, highlighting the flexibility for future enhancements. And California's division of the state architect actually uses increments to expedite construction starts, provided each increment is clearly defined and code compliant.
Okay.
Even FEMA sometimes piggybacks security enhancements onto normal maintenance schedules, spreading costs over time rather than funding large one-off projects.
So what does all this mean for the nuts and bolts of a county's actual operations? How do they implement these best practices for a capital improvement plan day to day?
Well, it really starts with a well-structured CIP process. You absolutely need a lead department, typically finance or public works, to coordinate all the activities.
Someone in charge.
Right. And a CIP committee, including leaders from various departments like transportation or utilities, is crucial. St. Johns County actually has an employee ranking team, which represents a cross-section of departments, specifically evaluating CIP requests.
Okay, so they have that structure.
That structure creates the necessary framework and ensures diverse perspectives are considered from the start.
And for a process this large involving so many millions of dollars in different departments, I imagine standardization is absolutely key to avoid just chaos.
Oh, it's vital. Developing a clear CIP calendar with firm deadlines and standardized project proposal forms is essential. That ensures you capture the scope, the justification, and the estimated costs consistently across all departments.
Makes sense.
And crucially, you need clear evaluation criteria for prioritizing projects. St. Johns County's ranking team, for instance, has already determined a uniform scoring methodology, and they've ranked over 235 project requests for the FY 2021-2025 period.
Wow, 235 requests.
Yes, it shows they're actively working on this systematic approach to evaluation.
So once projects are identified and ranked based on merit, what's the next step in actually bringing them to life, funding them?
Right. So departments submit their detailed proposals outlining the scope, the costs, and very importantly, the suggested funding sources. Is it coming from the general fund, an enterprise fund like utilities, or maybe potential grants?
Okay.
Projects are initially ranked regardless of immediate funding availability. This allows for a pure assessment of need and potential impact first.
Based on merit, not just money available right now.
Exactly. Then, the finance teams estimate the available revenues and reassess the priorities based on those fiscal constraints. This ensures the CIP is a dynamic, fiscally disciplined roadmap that continuously balances ambition with the actual resources available.
And that all gets compiled into the actual capital budget document.
Yes, the selected projects are compiled into a multi-year capital budget, which includes timelines, funding plans, and importantly, contingency funds. St. Johns County's CIP projects are actually reevaluated each fiscal year before final budget approval.
Oh, good. So it's not set in stone years in advance.
No, it adds another layer of scrutiny and flexibility. Then, for execution, monitoring, and control, robust governance is vital. Project managers need to oversee financial controls, maybe use automated workflows, and conduct regular reviews to identify risks or delays early.
Catch problems before they get big.
Precisely. And St. Johns County specifically utilizes strategic planning software to plan, monitor, and publicly report progress on their projects.
Publicly report. That's key for transparency.
Absolutely. It directly supports the best use of taxpayer funds by ensuring every dollar's impact is measurable and accountable to the public.
And finally, I guess, a smooth project closeout is essential to ensure the new asset, the road, the building is operational quickly and efficiently with a proper handoff to the maintenance teams who have to keep it running.
Correct. That transition is critical.
It really sounds like a holistic approach from planning to completion that truly translates into better value for taxpayer money through hopefully reduced waste and much more effective use of resources.
That's the goal, definitely.
Okay, so we've talked about how to fund these projects and how to manage them effectively, but how can a government truly, bake this fiscal prudence and operational excellence into its long-term strategy? How do they ensure it's not just a one-time effort, but a continuous cycle of improvement?
That's a really important question. How do you institutionalize efficiency? One way is through a dedicated Department of Government Efficiency, sometimes called a DOGE.
DOGE.
Yeah.
Okay, what would that do?
Its aim, fundamentally, is to modernize government operations, eliminate bureaucratic waste, streamline outdated systems, and continuously improve public services. It shifts the mindset from, say, reactive cost cutting to a proactive, systematic approach that's embedded right into the county's DNA.
And St. Johns County already has some initiatives that sound like they move in this direction,
Yeah.
right? They're not starting completely from scratch here.
No, they absolutely have a strong foundation. St. Johns County has an existing Office of Performance and Transparency. It's led by the Assistant County Administrator.
Okay.
And its mission is specifically to ensure efficient and effective county operations through data-driven performance management and continuous process improvements. They also have their Office of Management and Budget and an infrastructure delivery team, which, as we mentioned, oversees over 100 active projects totaling $450 million.
So pieces are there.
Yes, these are all working towards the core goals you'd expect from a dedicated efficiency department.
What are the concrete, sort of tangible benefits of having such a dedicated focus on efficiency and continuous improvement? What does it actually deliver?
Well, the benefits can be really substantial and quite far-reaching. Firstly, and maybe most obviously, you see significant cost savings.
How?
A DOGE actively works to optimize resource use. That could be through more strategic procurement, reducing redundancies between departments, or streamlining slow processes. We've seen examples from other county governments cutting hiring times by 37%, or cities reducing financial reporting time by 73% just through process improvements.
Wow.
And those savings directly free up funds that can then be reallocated to capital projects or other critical services, which directly supports avoiding new debt.
That's a direct impact on the bottom line, for
Yep.
sure. What about for the citizens? How does it affect them?
It leads directly to improved service delivery by streamlining processes. Things like getting permits processed become faster. Maybe emergency responses are more efficient. Cybersecurity measures get enhanced. It benefits every resident in tangible ways,
Faster permits would be nice.
wouldn't it? It also cultivates enhanced transparency and accountability. A core function of a DOGE is often making government spending more transparent, perhaps with real-time public disclosures or standardized reporting formats that are easy to understand. St. Johns County's existing office already aims to expand public access to information, which is vital for building public confidence.
And that transparency really is foundational to public trust, isn't it?
Absolutely essential.
What about improving the actual decisions being made within the government?
Well, it enables smarter decision-making. By emphasizing integrated data systems, a DOGE can provide a central source of truth for things like project status and budget alignment. St. Johns County already uses strategic planning software for this, as we noted.
Right.
This helps eliminate fragmented processes where different departments might not be talking to each other effectively, and it allows for timely detection of problems and also opportunities. This naturally leads to optimized budgeting and capital projects. It helps them plan, track, and present strategic plans more effectively, maybe match projects to available grants more easily, and really maximize the infrastructure budget they have.
Using data better.
Exactly. And lastly, there's workforce optimization. Streamlining tasks, automating repetitive work where possible, ensures that human resources are allocated to high-value roles where they can have the greatest impact. It's probably worth noting, too, that the Florida Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, was established by Governor Ron DeSantis specifically to promote this kind of thinking at the local level across the state.
Okay, so there's state-level encouragement, too. It really sounds like a truly holistic approach to not just financial health, but overall governmental effectiveness.
It aims to be, yes.
But beyond a county's own internal efforts, how do state organizations support local capital planning and budget optimization? Can they act as partners in this?
Oh, absolutely. State-level organizations can act as a significant force multiplier for local capacity, definitely. A key example is something called the Infrastructure Capital Improvement Plan, or ICIP.
ICIP.
It's often administered by state finance departments. This program helps local entities develop and update proactive 5-year plans for their infrastructure needs. It helps standardize capital planning across the state and align local projects with broader state goals. Leon County, Florida, and the city of St. Augustine, for instance, also have multi-year CIPs in place.
So the state helps them plan better,
hmm
which is crucial. Do they also help with finding the actual money?
Most definitely. Many states offer dedicated bureaus for this very purpose. New Mexico's Department of Finance and Administration, for example, has the Capital Navigation and Funding Bureau, the CNFA.
Capital Navigation Bureau. Sounds helpful.
Right. They assist public entities with funding navigation, helping them identify potential federal, state, and even private funding opportunities. They even provide a Capital Connect hub online for professionals to access resources and get technical assistance. It's like having a dedicated guide through that complex world of grants and funding streams.
That would be incredibly useful. And back here in Florida, we have that great example of a state-level financing alternative that's a bit unique, the one we mentioned earlier.
We do. The Florida Local Government Finance Program, the FLGFP, as we said, formed by that interlocal agreement between various Florida counties, including St. John's, it provides a low-cost financing alternative for capital improvement projects.
Right, over $2.8 billion loaned out.
Exactly. It's a vital resource for communities to access financing without necessarily going through the traditional, often higher cost bond markets. And state agencies also play a critical role in facilitating shared funding. They can help identify federal and state grants and assist local governments in structuring their internal funding to meet any local matching requirements.
So they help them qualify for grants.
Effectively, yes. Helping them stretch a tight budget to cover a big project, as the saying goes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture then, these institutional frameworks like a DOGE and these state partnerships, they aren't just about saving money in the short term, are they?
Not at all.
They're really about building long-term sustainability and resilience for local governments. It's about being proactive, not just constantly reacting to infrastructure crises when something breaks.
Precisely. It enables a much more strategic and ultimately less financially burdensome approach to infrastructure development and maintenance over the long haul. And that frees up local resources for other critical community needs.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, it seems pretty clear that for St. Johns County and really any municipality facing the constant need for capital improvements and renovations, effectively managing these projects comes down to a really multifaceted roadmap.
It really does. That roadmap includes embracing incremental project execution to enhance control and reduce that financial exposure we talked about.
Right, breaking projects down.
It also means aggressively pursuing diverse and non-debt funding sources, things like grants, impact fees, those public-private partnerships, and really building robust reserve funds and strong internal budgets.
And critically, it involves a very disciplined approach to bond issuance, truly viewing it as a last resort because of its substantial long-term costs and the potential burdens on future taxpayers.
Yes, that discipline is key. And finally, it's about establishing those robust institutional frameworks for continuous efficiency, whether that's a dedicated county department focused on efficiency or really leveraging those vital state-level partnerships for expertise and funding navigation.
By implementing these strategies, it sounds like local governments can achieve their infrastructure goals much more responsibly, protect taxpayer interests better, and really lay the groundwork for a more resilient, more transparent, and more efficient government that truly delivers value for the money spent.
And crucially, it's about protecting future generations from the consequences of today's financial decisions and ensuring growth is sustainable over the long term.
So here's something to think about. Consider how embracing these strategies transforms local government from maybe merely a service provider into something more dynamic, a force for community innovation and long-term prosperity, securing a brighter future without burdening generations yet to come. What kind of projects or initiatives really become possible when a county consistently builds its financial resilience through these means, rather than simply reaching for that debt-fueled easy button every time?